So, George, you work at a fairly unusual intersection between culture, capital, and policy. What personal experiences or moments first pushed you towards building financial infrastructure for Africa?
That's a really nice question. I've landed on this journey, so I'm still defining myself. I look back at the stuff that we've done. It's quite exciting. So you ask me, how did I stumble onto this? I think I'll start the story halfway.
Okay.
And then complete the story as we go. Somewhere around the year 2012, we're young. Nairobi is opening up. It's post-Kibaki glow. The country is hopeful. Enterprise is a new term. A bunch of my friends and I start an art center because culture, music, theater, arts in Nairobi were actually starting to be a real thing. And so we make films, we premiere them around the world. I've had the luck of red carpet twice at Toronto.
Okay.
I've had a red carpet at Berlinale. And so we were existing in this possibility, the Kenyan possibility of enterprise, SME, and all this post-Kibaki juice.
Yeah.
And we come back from Toronto with our audience award after showing a film. I think the film was called Stories of Our Lives. But I don't have rent.
From Cairo to Cape Town, Lagos to Lamu. 54 nations, one continent, countless perspectives. Hi, I'm Waweru Njoroge.
Hi, I'm Okoh.
Welcome to Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens. This is the podcast where we unpack power, policy, people, and the paradoxes that define our time. With nuance, with history, and with a deliberate commitment to context. This isn't punditry, it's perspective. It's not a briefing, it's a reframing, and it starts right here.
For decades, Africa's economic narrative has largely been defined by commodities. Oil, minerals, and agriculture have shaped both domestic policy and global perceptions of the continent's economic potential. But another sector is beginning to command serious attention: culture.
The global entertainment and media industry is approaching $3 trillion in value, and Africa is one of the fastest growing regions within it. The question now is whether the continent will simply export creativity or build the financial systems needed to capture the value behind it.
Our guest today works exactly at that intersection of culture and capital. George Gachara is a creative industry strategist and investor who has spent more than a decade designing financial vehicles and catalytic funds aimed at scaling Africa's cultural and creative economy.
His work spans initiatives from Afrexim Bank, the MasterCard Foundation, UNESCO's International Fund for the Promotion of Culture, and the Hever Fund, among others. In other words, while many conversations about culture focus on the artist and the content, George's work focuses on something equally critical: the financial and institutional systems that allow creative industries to scale.
I was on the newspaper, having represented the country, having made this film that's taken audiences around the world, but I still can't make rent. Down the road, obviously, we make rent because we're young people, we're innovative, we continue to do more work. But the question still lingers. How do we sustain our creative production? How do we fix that gap? At the beginning, we thought a SACCO, an artist, a creator's savings and credit would work. So a bunch of my friends and I, we start an experiment. We're like, can we start saving? And then can we register this thing? But down the road, I think 3-4 months later, we realized that the artists do not capture value enough to spend on themselves and save. So we realized this won't work. And so in our subsequent productions, we started putting money aside to invest in our future projects. But when we don't have projects, the money we have aside, we would lend it to our friends. And this is where the idea of investing in creative industries began. So we started doing it informally. I remember we put aside like $10,000. This was income from music and some activities that we'd done, and we started lending it. And down the road, we were like, this can actually be a thing. And so I think a couple of years later, I think we're almost past a decade, we've moved more than 4 billion shillings in contracts, around 14 countries in the region, and the contracts are in music, they're in fashion, they're in literature, live events, and everything yummy that's happening in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we stumbled on it.
So I'm going to, on that line of thought in terms of monies
Sure.
and SACCOs and what have you. So when investors look at this kind of creative industry,
Sure.
for us to look at the creative industry today, what do they most misunderstand about the sector?
So I actually will take that question a little bit back. Who is an investor? There are different kinds of investors, and the kind of investors that we have in our minds are the Silicon Valley, foreign direct investment type.
Yep.
But the biggest investors in culture and creative industries in this country and around the world are audiences.
Makes sense.
Interesting.
And local people. Think about it. If you go to a bar, if you wear clothing, if you buy toys, local toys for your children, if you buy furniture, who are the people who own those properties? People know, people that look like us. Do they have investors from outside?
Really?
Usually it's their families, it's their own savings, it's money that they did the hodgepodge and they finally made enough.
Something,
So the creative industry investor, the primary investor, is the artist in our sector.
Okay.
The second investor is the families and the immediate audiences. And later, people like me who are sympathetic or excited. So we are our own investors in the creative industries. But the biggest investor is the guy who buys the tickets, the family that take their kid for a film over the weekend. You go and buy clothes or toys. So really the biggest investors here are you and I.
Yeah.
Institutional investors like me are coming much later. And that's where my practice has been for the last 15 years.
Okay.
Yes.
So then I have a bit off question. So what would you call yourself then?
Oh, myself?
Yeah.
I see myself as a system builder.
Okay.
Or a capital architect. I'm looking for words that
I like the capital architect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because since that initial design where we put our own money, then the last 15 years I've been experimenting with my money, our money, other people's money, and how to align them to the opportunities within creative industries, how to recover it back, and to have a continuous loop.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then, at what point does culture stop being a development project
Sure.
and something that can be recognized as a serious economic sector? Usually we'd say, okay, well, let's have a painting over here in the corner or let's have somebody record something that we'll then put on the shelf and it collects dust. When can it actually be seen, or when does it actually become a serious earner?
So what I would say is that culture is already a serious earner. If you think about Nollywood, if you think about Amapiano, if you think about the film, the music, the literature, the lifestyles, the cultural product of Africa is not only like moving our cities, but it's getting attention globally. What we don't have, though, is the infrastructure to capture the value that's already being produced.
Okay.
It's not a question of whether we have a significant output. It's not that we do not have interest. It's that the infrastructure around you being able to buy a seasonal ticket for blankets and wine for 2027 doesn't exist. But if you are in America, you will buy tickets for the next Beyonce tour, and you will fly to Berlin, and you have 6 months or 7 months in advance to even pay it using your credit card on installment. It's the infrastructure to capture the value that we do not have mature.
Okay, we're going to expand on the infrastructure, but you mentioned the word. What do you think I've been doing here? Okay. So, no, but in terms of what you mentioned about value, now there's a PwC report, obviously, that came out that was talking about the fact that the global media or global entertainment and media industry actually is going to be hitting about $3 trillion. It's approaching $3 trillion. And that's basically what I was talking about in terms of value. but it's projected to grow even further
Yes.
in the coming years. When we look at the scale of capital and influence,
Sure.
where do you realistically see Africa
Sure.
positioning itself over the next 20 years or so?
So, before we go to the 20 years, I just want to deal with this 3 trillion. So that trillion, if you ask what is Africa's contribution, they'll tell you about 1%.
Yep.
And then when you go into the data and ask what is the captured data, you'll probably find a lot of advertising, like over mainstream advertising has been captured there, transaction around radio, the globally connected revenues. So
Yes.
like the Netflix revenue from Africa, the YouTube revenue from Africa.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an example. Most of Kenya's, Tanzania's, Ethiopia's YouTubers do not have their accounts domiciled in their countries because there's no monetization available in our region. So they will register in Korea, they will register in Dubai, they will register in LA, and that will be captured as America's contribution to culture.
Yeah.
And so that's a first invisibility. The second one is that culture and creative industries is run by SMEs, small, medium enterprises that file nil, that informally trade.
Yep.
Like I buy my clothes from Ghana, but they are they're sent to me in an envelope as mail, and then I have my and I take it to my local tailor, and they fix for me my blankets and wine outfits, but that's not captured. And so a lot of our trade is not captured. And so I do not believe that 1% is a true value of our cultural output. And the second thing is that once we are able to have sort of our own monetization platforms,
Yes.
our own equivalents of what you use to stream your music, or what you use to look at your film, or what you use to listen to your podcasts, then we can be able to start capturing the real data. I've been fortunate to invest in over 100 contracts. So I know the music that's moving in Mdundo. I know the fashion that's moving on Shop Zetu. I know the tickets that are being sold on mook.com. I know the kind of activity that's happening on Viewsasa. If that material was captured, that global value would probably double, and Africa's contribution would move beyond 15% to 20%. That's how I see it.
Okay. So Africa's entertainment and media sector is growing faster, we know this, than the global average. I mean, you mentioned Nollywood. We looking at movies coming out of South Africa, North Africa. From where you sit, what structural forces are actually driving that growth across the continent?
So there's a question you asked. What do we look, what is 20 years from now? I think years is beautiful horizon, but we can even break it into two. We are in 2026. By 2030, Africa has the largest human population of young people who are consumers, but also creators. And so I imagine even within the decade, Africa's cultural contribution to the world will circle the total global output of culture.
Okay.
For demographic, because of our demographic tailwinds. The second thing is our cultural material. What do I mean our cultural material? If you think Korea, you think about noodles, you think about their herbs, white face, and so we're already exposed to some sort of global signals of what other cultures are. What if I asked you, what do you think when I say Zambia? What comes to your mind?
The first thing you think is copper or Victoria Falls.
True.
Yeah.
Because we haven't explored their cultural material. When you think about Uganda, what do you think?
Cranes.
Yeah, you see, it's because we haven't quite. But when I say America, what do you think?
There's a plethora of things: movies,
music,
Beyonce.
Because their cultural material has already been commercialized.
There you go,
and it's visible because it's visible in our television. It's visible in our supermarkets.
But that goes back to what you're saying about infrastructure at the end of the day.
Plus, it was deliberate.
So there's a tailwind. There's like this IP material from how we eat, how we make our food, how we dance, how we make our clothes, how our grandfathers and grandmothers sit or postures and dances. All that material has not yet been commercialized.
How did we lose IP on kangas?
Somebody came and said, well, this is nice, can I buy it? And I guess
we should have
not looking
protected
at a
that
place
IP
whereby the issue of greed overtook anything about an IP. Somebody's offering you a certain amount of dollars, you're going to take it without realizing what comes next.
I think from Africans, we just think we have a lot of stuff. So nobody's really like...
Without realizing the value of it.
And
and
because
that's
it's
where
not
the
yet been
problem. I think
commercialized.
where the problem is knowing our own self-worth.
Sure.
Therein lies the problem, and I think it's a colonial hangover. But that's my thought right now.
I just imagine that as soon as we start to imagine what we have as cultural material that can be tradable as IP, then something begins to shift. When you think about Parmesan cheese, what is that?
It's fermented milk.
Yeah, but it's a cultural practice
It
of a
is.
certain group of people in a certain region. There's scaffolding around it, and they created a global opportunity for this type of cuddled milk.
And really talked it up.
Have you had mursik recently? Mursik is a probiotic. I hope whoever is listening to this does not run.
So is the thing in Nigeria called fura danono, which is the same thing, actually.
But it's not Parmesan.
No, it's not. But
But
it
it
could be
could-
better.
It could become.
Yeah.
Well,
could
in
be
the
better.
thought process, if you look at it.
Ogogoro,
Yeah.
for example.
Exactly.
There's a young lady who's making Pedro's Premium Ogogoro, which is like palm wine but fancy. And it's taken Nigerians by surprise that this thing that their grandparents used to make, that some people they think are not cool enough make, when it's packaged properly,
It becomes a different
It's
kettle of
different.
fish.
comes
The Ugandans have done
Some-
it with Waraji, haven't they?
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something you mentioned, 3 countries you mentioned Zambia, you mentioned Uganda, which made me think about the fact that you're looking at the big 3, or the big boys in terms of the creative economy. Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya is going to jump in there as well, right? So we have the 3 biggest creative economies on the continent, actually. So why have these particular countries been able to, grow, dig roots, and have anchors across the sector?
So I think we're all different. And our differences are like magic. I'll start with South Africa. There's a unique quality about South Africa that allows the family expenditure for culture becomes a lifestyle choice, a regular everyday lifestyle choice, because there is a sort of European model of government that invests in dance, that invests in public infrastructure, that has music schools, theaters. And so there's a public subsidized investment towards culture, which then makes it ubiquitous, makes it a regular thing for the people in that economy.
Almost expected. Yeah.
And they also have universities that have departments of culture that are well funded, that have endowments. So it's a very European model. And so then you produce a society that has a certain esteem, that considers itself human, the kind of human who consumes dance and theatre.
Cultured.
Then we'll go to our friends across Nigeria. Despite their state, maybe the interruption wasn't as effective as it was in the case of Kenya.
Yeah.
So that there are still direct linkages to their culture,
Yes.
and they still esteem in that space.
Absolutely.
And also because they have a massive diaspora that earns in dollars and that's nostalgic about home. So they have pool.
Okay.
There's a heavy pool of that then becomes systematic. And so despite government's failure, that is they're demanding paying local audience and international audience.
Yeah.
Come to our case here in Kenya, a smaller economy in the cross-section of a public sector that wants to do something good but doesn't have enough money or will or is not sophisticated, but also a Western aspiring middle class. So in my early years, studying abroad, wearing clothes from abroad, having a cousin in America,
Right.
Australia, that's like really the cool side of the family. And so then Kenya is pulled between this aspirational culture and a sort of like a public space that's permissive. And so then we create, in the middle of it, there's now a bit of space for entrepreneurship. And so then you see culture and creative industries fledgling.
Yeah.
But does it grow to the capacity that it could?
It has a potential.
What do you think?
It could do a lot more, that's for sure.
It's like my school report. He could do better.
You could do better.
Approaching expectation.
Yeah.
Yes.
It could.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we look at how the creative economy actually works, for many African creators today, global visibility has expanded dramatically through, obviously, social media platforms. YouTube, Spotify, streaming services, all of that has blown it up. Visibility and income are not always the same thing. Like you said, you had a newspaper article with you there in the picture, but you couldn't pay rent.
Sure.
So from your vantage point, where does the real money actually flow in Africa's creative economy today?
Where does the real money flow? So there's the money that has visibility, which is the money that is usually reported, what Universal acquired, what Trace TV has acquired,
Canal Plus.
what Canal Plus has done, or Mnet has merged with. And so I think that's the top sliver of money. And I dare say it's only because it's visible, because it's international. I think most of the money is still at SME level across the continent.
Okay.
If you think about the bar or the live music space that you visit often, or the butchery that has a stage that you can listen to a one-man guitar, or that establishment that your folks took you when you were young but still operational, the Njugunas or the blue
Snow cream.
Snow cream. Well, yes.
To a point. Okay, you don't have a... Okay, but...
I don't know. I'm trying to use examples of the furniture that we have in our cities. Those are maintained by us, and those investments are predominantly local. And so there's a lot of outlay of capital locally. Parents want to see their kids succeed, and so they will use their income to support their daughter to record their first album. And if it doesn't do well, they will sponsor the second album, then the encore. So there's a lot of investment, but that investment does not have enough velocity to get you into real commercial business. And so now the question is, do we have capital flows that has enough velocity to move you from micro business to medium to large? So if you go to Sarit Center, we've been talking about it, there's a bowling alley. That bowling alley is easily 100 million shillings, $1 million of investment.
Okay.
But that's local investment. So there is money in entertainment. If you look at the restaurant scene in Nairobi, it's local investment in culture and creative industries. And now we're leaning even more into cuisine, innovation and design, you know. So a lot of money is still invisible because it's at the SME level. But we're now starting to see the upshoots, the ones that get now the second velocity money that makes you Vivo. So that if you go to every mall, you can see a Vivo store and it has a catalog for you to buy something every month. And so now the next 20 years, as you'd asked, is now to find the money that has that velocity to move us from SME, ma and pa businesses, to become a real scalable operations.
Right.
And we're starting to see hundreds of these. In my portfolio, I have Harriet Ngok. She sells herbal remedies. She started with a tincture. Now she has a whole product line from wellness to stress to coughs to different things using her heritage from Sotik.
Right.
We have MOOC, which is now a ticketing platform that Chan is using. They're not using a French or an American platform. They're using our own local investment that has the capacity to ticket around all the East African countries during the games. And we have the homeboys, we have the... So now we are starting to see the visibility of culture and creative industry investments.
I'm going to go slightly off tangent here, then I'll come back. I want to look at the aspect of... we'll look at the aspect of digital advertising and what that impact has. But assume you're Lion's Den, one of the panelists on Lion's Den.
Sure.
Somebody comes and pitches the idea to you.
Sure.
Right? And the people who are going to be watching this, I'm sure, will be coming to you at some point.
Sure.
Young, 15 to 20 years. What would you be looking in, if you're investing in MOOC and things like that?
Sure.
What would you be looking for? I mean, obviously there's aspects of ROIs and things like that, but in terms of it was an elevator pitch, what would make you think, okay, fine, this is something that I want to sink my teeth into?
So I think maybe I'll take, because I think the listener now shifts into someone who's trying to apply to me.
Yeah.
So I sit in numerous vehicles. And each vehicle responds to a different opportunity. And so in Kenya and in the East African space, I founded an investment vehicle called HEVA, which is a well-capitalized local institution that's investing anything between $100K to $1 million in contracts. And we're looking at music, we're looking at fashion, we're looking at digital technologies, we're looking at live events, we're looking at the entire spread of culture and creative industries. Yeah. And at the lower level, the person who comes into the door and gets some money, that's someone who has an enterprise. It has to been registered, it has to have some traction. You have to have taken a product to the market and tested from the market.
Okay.
You have to have a bit of a team, and you have to have a revenue. Like, you have to tell me that this is what you're making, but if you get this money, you'll do exactly this, and based on what you've already done before, opportunity will make this. And then we can decide whether it's a debt facility we give you, or an equity, or something in between, or a tailored financial facility. The other vehicle that I sit as a director is an Afrexim Bank subsidiary, which is a continental investment platform, which really blows projects out of the water because our floor ticket size is $1.5 million. The ceiling has not been imagined. So it's the scale of the ambition, the characteristics of the opportunity. And so at Canex, we easily can invest in a film that's being shot in 5 countries that will be distributed globally, and that might need anything like $10 million, $15 million. And so those two pitches are different. And so advise, like, generally for our who have enterprises that are looking for financing, they really have to have strong IP.
Yeah.
Culture and creative industry, our foothold, the strength of the product. And the product is, what is your style? What are you suggesting? What is your persuasion? Is it the clothing? Is it the color? Is it the material? Is it that combination? What are you hacking into? If you're selling this film, who are the people who you think want to watch another Nelson Mandela film?
Right.
Or another Sarafina? Or are the kids looking for a Wakanda film that sounds like them but's global? So the IP has to be compelling. And so you have to do your work. Then the rest of the scaffolding, if the IP is very strong, investors will come and help you.
If you build Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come.
True.
So Nigeria is expected to see more than 80% of advertising become digital in the coming years. What does that shift mean for African creators and media platforms?
So then we have 2 categories of people here. There is the creators and there's the creatives.
Yes.
And so then we are talking about the creators, and these are the digital natives. And I like this category because they have leapfrogged the challenges of the creatives, because they create for platforms in platform that are already monetized, that create data, that already have direct paths to audience. So I really like the creators because they don't have the same challenges as the creatives.
Okay.
And I like both of them. So the creator economy is a brilliant new reality in our economies. I'll give you an example. Here in Kenya and in East Africa, we've co-invested in a facility for creators. So when you think about creators, think about either a brand influencer or you and I who are podcasters. That's still content creation. And your platforms are the existing platforms, and then you monetize in those platforms. So your challenge is never that you cannot monetize. Your challenge is the products, the frequency, the audience development, and so on and so forth. And so one category of creators, I'm fully in love with them. They're these guys who get brand endorsements, they get affiliate links and all these people. And there is 15,000 of them in one platform called Waweru. And so we realize that these guys have a very big turnover. So because a lot of money in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa is moving towards them, but it comes to them in a characteristic of the ad agency takes 90 days to pay them, but the client takes another 120 days to pay them. So between delivering their work and getting their money, they have like 4 or 5 months. So we've layered a financial facility, we're calling it Fast Pay, on creator platforms that as soon as their invoices are verified by their off-takers, we advance 70% of their money to them. And now we are shuffling $1 million monthly in this economy. So I imagine the scale of Nigerian economy, that place is beautiful. And so creators and the ecosystem must mature so that then now the ecosystem starts to layer security around these incomes, where you get insurance, you are able to save for your retirement, you get health, housing, everything that people in the mainstream economy can get. Your income, even if it's digital, can start to get all these layered services because it's a reality in our economy. Second thing is that incomes within the creator economy are the fastest growing incomes in any category of creative industries practices because they're already monetized. So the question is, how innovative are the creators? If you look at regions like China and Southeast Asia, they no longer rely on brand endorsements. They're now completely integrated in the business process. So they get affiliate links, they earn, and I was in Dubai, I think early this year, for a content creators summit, and I started to meet the first $1 billion valued creators, the likes of Mr. Beast, the likes of that guy who does this Kabile, and these people now have larger command and valuation more than our listed companies on the stock exchange in Nairobi. And so what I am observing is that there is a shift to reorganize marketing, to reorganize attention economy, and a lot of value is moving towards the creators. And I hope the creatives can start to use digital channels to move some of their value, because that's where we're seeing a lot of growth.
So financing, I want to talk about the paradox in regards to financing. Right? So one of the paradoxes for Africa, as you know, is our creativity, right, is very much consumed by global audiences, right? And we are expanding rapidly. Yet access to capital for creative, creative business remains extremely limited.
Sure.
Where is the challenge?
That's my lifetime, that's my life question. What I would say is that there's no shortage of IP.
Right.
Literally, which is sad. You go to every city center, you walk in every city on a weekend, you're just seeing kids making content. They're dancing, they're doing whatever they're doing, but there's talent. We don't have infrastructure. Infrastructure for me is platforms. Infrastructure is registries, because then we need to move from asset financing to IP-based or revenue-based financing. In the gaps are catalog financing, because if you have a studio and you've recorded all this music or you've recorded all these episodes, what is the next life of these episodes? And can you get residual value? Can you syndicate this with Nation Media so that they pay you for these episodes to be aired every week, so that then you are earning from IP, not necessarily just the product.
Yeah.
And finally, I think really dedicated finance. We don't have that in the scale that we need it. We have financing for vehicles, we have financing for agriculture, we have a financing for SGR and pipelines. Very customized with the risk costed into it, with the period, business cycle, but we have no financing that is designed for creative industries. And so if you take the money that exists at X bank and give it to creatives in the model that is in, it will indebt them because the business cycles do not match.
No.
Or the amortization does not match. So the other structural limit is the design of the money. And that's why I'm playing a bit of a role in starting to do financial innovation, risk modeling, that allows large institutions with capital to start to align with this emerging sector.
Okay. So obviously there's a risk there. And is that why financial institutions may have wanted to ignore the sector previously?
That's lazy.
Okay.
I mean, like, if all our manufacturing is happening in China and they still want to make money out of this economy into the future, then it is upon them to invest in R&D. So I'm not interested in those lazy conversations. And if there's any banker and investor listening to me, the opportunity is clear, but nobody is going to invest in your learning. And so as HEVA, we're working with mainstream banking institutions to partner with them because they have a deeper balance sheet than ours. So we can do matching. So we can go at the opportunity together. And maybe they can cut their learning journey if they are clever. But if they are not, then they'll have to wait until our valuation goes to the roof in another decade, and they have to buy us in the regular market. But anyone who is intelligent, who looks at the demographics, who's looking at the penetration of digital tools, that's looking at positioning intelligently in the continent, they must start to align themselves with where African IP is being produced, how it's being produced, and how it's being shared. And those that will have an outlay in the infrastructure, when the bigger players, the Disneys, the YouTubes, that want to have a position in a 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion market, they will acquire them. So this is the time that you have legroom.
Okay. Speaking of IP.
Tell me.
So this issue of our history, rich culture as an African continent, right? We've exported raw commodities all the time, while much of the value is always captured outside. Like we say, we export raw materials and import refined disappointment.
True.
Yeah. Could IP realistically become one of the continent's next major exports?
It is already. I'll give you an example. If you go to the Baringos, this is the floor of the Rift Valley. Some tourists come to Kenya and they pretend that they're going to take photos of flamingo, and they get our pigment, they get our enzymes that come from our waters, and they use it in Southeast Asia to fade genes. If you go to Kilifi, the color pigment used really for most of this lipstick is a natural material that comes from our soils towards the coast.
Can you put an IP on natural resources?
Yes, that's our that's our endowment.
As Kenya, you could do that.
Yes.
Okay, but I cannot go in as. But
Waweru can find a way to manipulate those things and privatize that.
Yes.
Look at a guy called Laduma Makosa of South Africa. It comes from the Xhosa tribe, and they do this plating, these baskets, and everybody out in Africa, we have that. But this guy has created a unique pattern, and he sells the most expensive socks in the world today, are Laduma Makosa's traditional designs. And so there is a way for us to commercialize, but not in that exploitative way that benefits our community, but blows our heritage out of the water.
Okay. So if Africa succeeds in building a large creative economy, all of these things, these architectural pieces that you've spoken about, who captures most of the wealth? Are we talking about creators, investors, governments, or global platforms? Who gets this value?
As we sit right now, the creators are at the tail end. Let's talk about creators, not creatives. Between YouTube, Spotify, and all those other streamers, you will find the CPM rate, the rate of compensation per view or per unit, is the lowest in Africa. As compared to other regions. They have these SQs that the advertisers are from other regions, and so they are the regions that have the highest advertisers, then they pay most. And so you realize that if you go into these platforms and remove the African content, those archives will be hollow.
True.
You know? But then we just escort the other creators, while they get better payments, we get peanuts. And so I saw 2 days ago that I think TikTok and YouTube met the president of Rwanda, and they were able to get a deal on monetization. And while I'm clapping for that, and I think that that's brilliant, why is it that you need the president to negotiate for a sector that's producing? Why don't we just pay creativity for creativity? So my argument is that the creators themselves and their communities and their families and their rich uncles need to start moving money from plots and apartments on Thika Road, and they move them into IP on platforms. MOOC should be traded at the stock exchange. Shop Zetu should be our Amazon. We should move our capital to our platforms so that in this Web3, whatever we call it, that we put our capital where we can harvest our value. And once we do that, then your uncle who was trying to put money on your first and second CD can actually get a retirement by investing in a chunk of MOOC that is traded publicly. This next decade, we need to mobilize our resources and move it to local platforms across the continent, resource them to have capacity, and then we enjoy the upside.
Careful, the folks who've been making money when this has not been happening might hear you.
I am making money from these platforms. But I imagine that your uncle, your retirement money, some of it can move from your offshore accounts. I'm talking to rich people
with offshore accounts.
I was going to say which retirement money?
You're all banking with Stanbic, and you talk to your RM. You tell your RM, move this money out of this economy, take it to the top 500. So you move your money to other people's economies, then their platforms get a significant cheap credit because we are all rushing our monies into their financial systems, and we deprive ourselves of the money that will give us velocity.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned the word government. Hypothetically. So if African governments began treating creative industries as strategic sectors, right? The same way they treat agriculture, the same way they look at mining, the same way they look at energy. What kinds of policies would actually accelerate growth?
So first, the governments, they will be forced to acknowledge because they have to deal with their demographics. You've seen across the East Africa countries that whenever there is a dynamic social conversation or political conversation, it becomes so intense, close to breaking the consensus. They cannot ignore it anymore. Nobody can. And so then it is in the interest of the governments to be intelligent. And the beauty is that Africans are so well capacitated. They're the ones running these global empires, from Universal Music to Sony Fund. You meet really cool Africans, East Africans. You go to Netflix.
I was going to say.
The entire operation in Dubai has more than 5 Kenyans. You go to all this, YouTube is a Nigerian. You go to Google, a Kenyan. We have the brain power to advise our governments if they were intelligent. But whether they're intelligent or not, they have to confront this. And if they had asked me, I'd say the first thing to do is to think about IP. I see East African governments running to give rebates for Americans to shoot their films in our region because we need a few films to be shot here, Tomb Raider, whatever. And they put $200 million in foreign films. I would argue that those guys can afford to come here. Yeah. What you need to do here is to build our R&D. So the Kenya College of Mass Communication should be, that 200 million should go to build the capacity of that college to be world class. So what happens that we churn out animators, post-production kids, and all these kids with all these capacities around a world-class facility. And what happens, because they're Africans and they're still living in their mothers' homes, their per day rate will be lower than those living in Korea, Yemen, and in the US. And so all those jobs will migrate here because editing, you send your things online.
Absolutely.
So then we build our IP and human capacity upwards, like Korea, like Malaysia. And then down the road, Kenya becomes the destination for film post-production. So everyone knows if they're making a CGI thing, it's cheaper to send it to Kenya because they'll do it at world class, but Kenyans spend in Kenya shillings.
Indeed.
So I think there has to be an imaginative way. The second way is infrastructure. Infrastructure is critical. Where do we produce, how do we produce, and where do we consume? If I was President Ruto, all those stadiums that he has promised should be multimedia centers, multi-purpose. They can be sports today. Tomorrow there are markets. The other day there are music concerts, and they are hubs for culture and creative production. And they have hostels, so that those public infrastructure stop becoming like dead single-use instruments. That they become centers for production. I'll give you another example. We've never explored our underwater resources. We don't have a Narnia. We don't have what's that fairy tale? We go in Dubai.
The underwater the aquarium.
There's a word for it.
There is actually.
The earning infrastructure in the it's just an imaginary
virtual reality. No.
It's actually the.
I thought
like
because I saw one.
It's the sea, and you walk through
Atlantis.
Atlantis. There you go.
But Nigeria now have a virtual reality aquarium, by the way.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Think about it. We have Chinese ships that were here in the 5th century, 7th century, off of the Ministry of Culture should just have a project. And he says that we have $1 million for a creative challenge. We want you to create use this material, this story, to create a world, whether it's literature, whether it's gaming, what's animation, and we will finance you to create IP around this resource. And from a tourist perspective, these guys go and build, and then we bring the world through Kenya Airways to
come and experience
this stuff, and we send out plays. Everybody goes to watch Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a made-up stuff. We go to that train station where there is nothing. The portal that
13 and a half.
But like that's a story.
It's
that's
a real
made
story.
Up. But we don't invest in our stories in any significant way that allows people to innovate and create product from a tourism perspective. So we need as imaginative with projects.
As possible.
CS for creative.
I know. That's it. Take it into governance. Well, looking ahead 20 years.
Sure.
Africa will, do you believe Africa will primarily remain a producer of culture, or could the continent also become a global owner of culture, just like what you said now? Own the space, the infrastructure and platforms. Will Africa be, in the next 20 years, the continent where this is owned and not just created?
I think we're the cusp of something. I don't know. A lot of people find it scary, this AI thing, because you cannot talk about a future without thinking about how this future will look like. The last decade was amazing because it was relatively flat, that it was your ingenuity, your proximity to platforms, your sophistication. That was a competition. But now, everyone must produce because the tools have democratized production. So I imagine that if everybody can produce a song, everybody can produce a game, everybody can produce a and go to market, because platforms are the future and the tools are being democratized, and we have story, then the people who really can create good IP, thoughtful IP, numerous layers of IP, and then find partnerships, then they will have a place in the world.
Yeah.
And the partnerships is to create a world, not just a song, create the world around the song, so that the song is one part of the world. There is the world where literature, you can create literature, you can create games out of the same world, you can create courses out of the same world, because now the painting is no longer flat. The painting is Narnia. You have to the painting, and we have the tools for that.
That's a wonderful visual, by the way. Yeah.
And so then the future is that now we have to stop beating kids when they're scrolling. Now we have to give them tools to create the stuff that other kids are scrolling.
There you go.
Okay.
Even at the beginning, because these kids, they probably will go to school, but then the curriculum for the primary school that we are taking them to is already obsolete. The jobs that curriculum would train them for won't exist by the time they whatever. So then it's to orient them to be producers and to produce with the IP even where they are right now. And so the future is dynamic. The future has new possibilities, but then it's so unequal.
Yeah.
The problem with it is it's so unequal that a few people using the access and the technologies that they will have will dominate
or monopolize,
and everyone else will become a consumer
or be playing second fiddle. Speaking of the future,
tell us.
Right, if I was to look at you personally, if you were to put a bet in place for long term, right, which sector is most likely to produce Africa's first $1 billion cultural company? Music, film, gaming, fashion, or digital creators?
So I'll say this, tailwinds are great because then they take you further than your own effort. And so I think the digital space and all the possibilities within the digital space are starting to signal at a faster rate of growth than most other physical goods.
Okay.
Because you might need either an extreme valuation, and we are seeing African art.
Yep.
We're seeing that from Sotheby's to Christie's, now African visual artists are starting to be collected as major global artists. In Kenya here, we have the likes of Cyrus Kabiru, who now I cannot afford. And recently, like 5 years ago, we were just having beers together.
Yeah.
But that has a little bit of an outlier because the global system still likes the token Africa. It's not equal. But in the digital space, the cost of acquiring a customer, the cost of sustaining subsequent or the life value of a customer, the ability to form instant connection is no longer midwifed by institutions. And so those people who produce digital first and that they get layered products and lifetime value, they're the first billionaires. And we already are starting to see them.
Yeah.
But also people who have the platform infrastructure that allows the multitude of creators to create value together are the ones that, and the people who are creating future media, you guys, are going to be billionaires first. Because we have this first wave of the billionaires. And then once we become the digital billionaires, then
I'm liking this talk.
I'm listening. I'm just keeping quiet. Yes.
With our platforms and our continental barrierless distribution, then now we can create the future industries, or we can break up, or we can be regulated, or we can be constrained by new laws, new exogenous factors.
So from that perspective, I know we've talked about this a couple of times before.
Sure.
So we'll go back to, and I always get Muhammad Gaddafi and the United States of Africa.
Sure.
Digital can create the United States of Africa.
It already
Has.
Sure.
So content creators can collaborate from South Africa to Nigeria, to whatever, to create that pool that you're saying in terms of a resource that people can actually then say, okay, fine, this is where we'd like to pull either ideas from or talent from and those kind of things. Okay. There's one more thing we needed to check.
Yeah. So there's been a lot that has taken away from Africa, that has been stripped when it comes to IP theft, especially coming in from the East. What are your thoughts around this? There are many notable cases. The Lafufu dolls, for example, counterfeiting of this doll, Chinese IP, by Chinese creators. There are many that we've seen that have come up. How do we deal with such things? First of all, is it a chagrin moment when we say this is actually happening? And how should these be countered futurely?
I have many thoughts around what I look at it in two ways. First is our relationship to IP and previous practices. So we think of our icons, the Yvonne Chakachakas, Hugh Masekele. All these big African IP powerhouses do not own any of their patrimony,
unfortunately.
So there has to be a question as to who in the continent redomiciles our patrimony. Any patrimony that is cultural, that is valuable, that is linked to even a people or a moment can be redomiciled. And the reason for redomiciling it is so that then the next of value that comes out of that is captured locally. So the idea of Hugh Masekele and his life, the Americans, Ray Kruger and all these people have already taken the first value out of it. But if it comes back to a new generation, that entire archive, we will have remixes, covers, reanimations, recommercialization of existing IP, so that we do not have to invest in new IP from zero. So there has to be a re-domicile, whether it's legal or buybacks. That's a critical part of our cultural sovereignty. The second part is the current productions that we are having.
You're right.
How do we treat them? And so the new wave of cultural production has to be intelligent, has to be secured, and that has to be a critical part of production, not an incidental part of production, because artists will think about the work before they think about protecting the work. So the scaffolding around the protection of the work has to go in tandem with the creation. So that then, like 2-3 years ago, when Orchid came to buy catalogs for global distribution in the continent, and we were trying to finance some of those catalogs, we found that the IP practices were terrible. That the producer is a drummer, is a musician, and then that stuff cannot be traded. So there has to be integrity in our IP practices. And second, we also have to own the monetization channels. So then we have the sovereignty of the macadamia nut becoming macadamia oil before it leaves Kiambu or Kenya. And I think this is a question that we have to deal with, not just for IP, but every other resource, whether it's a commodity resource, whether it's minerals. And that is the conversation that Africa must confront right now.
We've mentioned Beyonce like 3 times now.
Sure.
And whatever she's doing in terms of her IP.
Sure.
Right? And obviously we know she's American, not originally, but her roots are elsewhere. But what can we learn from what the US has basically done in terms of how they build their IP, especially with regards to the value chain? I say this because they are the masters of not using it for economy, but for soft power, diplomacy. Well,
I like the Americans because Africans really like them. We grew up wanting to go to New York because we watched hip-hop videos, and we imagined ourselves Tupac. And we imagined ourselves the stories that they produced. And so that paints for us a picture of what a certain type of soft power can be produced. But truly, the African way does not have to be the American way, even if we learn from the Americans, because we exist in time and space in a different way.
Yep.
What I would say is that the African soft power is truly soft power. It's not the enveloped glove. It's persuasive. Recently, there was all this AI music of regular pop songs. So they would say, please Africanize this song.
Right.
And there is I won't say which, because I don't want to popularize the AI version.
Yeah.
But every time you look at the comments, the global north would say like, oh, that I felt goosebumps. I don't know if you've seen that kind of comment.
Yeah, no, I've seen
behind the music. I felt goosebumps. I felt like Lion King. I felt like I was worshipping. African soft power is actual soft power. It persuades. It persuades deeply.
Yeah.
And in a less arrogant, not in an empire way.
Kind of way.
And I have no problem with empires. And so Africa has to lean into itself, accept its style, its posture as legitimate, and project it. Accept its accent and not be shamed for it. Accept its use of consonants.
Yeah, so
and that should be our soft power. The same way the American tongue or the British tongue is persuasive to a certain kind of person. And so I think the African soft power does not need a military industrial complex to move it.
No.
It will move because first we will produce the most. We're the most populous and youngest, which goes with cool. So all we just need is the infrastructure and the dignity infrastructure for that. And so let's say America continues to do its soft power. What I mean is that there's a place for America's soft power and there's a place for African soft power, and none of those two models must be the same.
One quick question before we sign off. Just a quick one.
Sure.
In terms of culture, and just thinking in terms of aspects of people investing, outside of mom and pop shops and everything.
Sure.
If a heavyweight investor was to look at, okay, fine, I want to invest in, anyway, it might be any industry. But are we also then, maybe I suppose to start with home, but look at the continent as a whole, corruption is a culture. That presents a challenge in itself, right? So how are you then going to then overcome that kind of aspect in terms of saying, bring your money to me and we'll make sure that do it in the right, because that to me is a bit of a challenge.
So I imagine that corruption is a challenge across the world.
True.
But the world has built instruments and institutions that protect some sort of integrity, whether it's from accounting standards. So you can hear there's a AAA bank.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there are no corrupt people. It's just that there's a standard, and that standard is people are held to account as a practice, and that there is consequence for certain transgressions, and they're immediate, both culturally, legally, and procedurally. So I don't think that there's a way to read corruption, and I really dislike the idea that Africa is synonymous to corruption. I think it's a convenient narrative.
Okay.
And I distance myself completely from it because I am constantly in conversations and in business partnerships with many Africans. And in my experience, the number of fraud, the number of times there's been fraud even related to anything I work is very limited. The number of times that there has been an unexplained deal are fewer than what I see in the media. And so I just, at least from my practice, maybe I'm a small player within a small little industry, but from my own practice, I find that most Africans that I've interacted with want to do good. They want to earn honestly, and they're not even greedy. In fact, they don't even want investment because they don't even think they can qualify for it. They want to bootstrap. It's me who's telling them you can sophisticate. And so, at least in the creative industry, audiences can tell work that's dishonest. they can tell work that's pretending to be something that it's not. So from an audience perspective, we have integrity. From the artist perspective, a lot of artists think of themselves connected to their practice as their life mission. They don't even think of themselves as entrepreneurs. In fact, they don't even treat their IP as IP. They just think, this is a thing, this is a feeling I had. So they're deeply connected to their practice. And so the question of corruption maybe comes when they interact with industry, or someone who has gambling money who wants to put it in creative industries so that they can clean it or something like that. It's usually exogenous. So at least in my practice, what the conversation around fraud, because corruption for me is just fraud and theft.
Yes.
And that can be mitigated by process, and there can be punishment for it. And so for us, as HEVA, we punish that kind of behavior. But we also have practices that are audited, that have visibility to different players.
Checks and balances.
Yes, that reduce the incidences or even that kind of stuff. So I refuse that I have a practice that is near corruption. I refuse that I interact with corrupt people. I refuse that I am to be seen as an African who is also synonymous as a corrupt person. This investor who is coming from abroad, who has made their money from a certain industry, and they have the adventurism to move from their country to come to emerging markets. What is their motivation? What is the due diligence? What are the kind of people that they talk to when they come to this place? They cannot also transfer the responsibility of their due diligence to us. Why did they pay to anyone that they thought was
going to make it happen?
To make it possible for them to get...
Because they are greedy. They also have to carry part of the blame. And so...
That's a good hard stop, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely. You need to put this in a bottle so that we can sell it, drink it. It's definitely a great conversation to have had with you, George.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here on Panel 54 to have this conversation with us, because, my goodness.
It's an eye-opener.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
20 years, maybe far off,
But we're going to be billionaires.
This is the point that we must go away.
If I take anything away from this conversation, I'm going to be a billionaire.
And reinvest.
Okay, that's a very important thing, actually.
Important one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
George,
thank you so much, George.
Thanks again. All right.
What today's conversation makes clear is that Africa's culture rise is no longer simply about artistic influence. It is increasingly about economic architecture, the systems that finance creativity, protect intellectual property, and scale culture industries into durable markets.
George helped us unpack the structural challenge behind that shift. Creativity across the continent is abundant, but the financial instruments, institutional frameworks, and policy alignment needed to support it are still emerging.
If those systems are built, Africa's creative economy could evolve from a collection of culture movements into a fully fledged economic sector, one capable of generating employment, exporting intellectual property, and shaping global cultural narratives.
But if the continent fails to build that architecture, the world may continue celebrating Africa's culture while much of the value behind it is captured elsewhere. You've been listening to Panel 54, where we rethink the world one African perspective at a time. If it made you pause, reflect, or reframe, share it, start a conversation, and don't forget to tag us in. Find us on your favorite social media handles and your favorite streaming platform, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, keep the lens clear. Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens.